Welcome back to the Oscar Project Podcast, the show where I discuss Oscar-nominated films year by year. I'm your host, Jonathan Eaterberg, and today I'm bringing you an interview with brothers Sam and David Cutler-Kreutz, directors of the short film Trapped. Before I jump into the interview, please be sure to subscribe to the show in your podcast player so you can get all the newest episodes as soon as they are released. If you like the interview and want to hear more, please consider leaving a rating and review in Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Sam and David Cutler-Kreutz are an Oscar-nominated writing, directing, and producing team based between New York and Los Angeles. Growing up making films together, the brothers first gained international recognition with their short Flounder, which premiered in the Clermont-Ferrand International Competition in 2022. Their sophomore short, Lien, executive produced by Adam McKay, was nominated for the 97th Academy Awards. They join me today on the podcast to talk about their latest short, Trapped. Sam and David, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having us. Good to be here.
So one of the first things that jumps out when watching Trapped is what the film has to say about some class dynamics. Tell me a little bit about the inspiration for the story of this school janitor navigating various obstacles while cleaning the school after hours.
Yeah, so our mom was a teacher. And in a prep school like this, and we grew up going with her to school after our schools had finished. And so we'd be there after hours as little kids all the way through, up through high school or whatever. We're sort of running around the school and getting this very interesting kind of like unique perspective on a very complicated institution with a lot of class and power dynamics. And, these were, because our mom was a teacher, these issues came home with us to the dinner table every night, faculty versus staff, kids versus teachers, administrators versus everybody else. This kind of like complicated dynamic was sort of kitchen table issues for us growing up. And so we thought it was a really interesting kind of like microcosm that sort of looks at the larger structures of class in this country. That really was very much the kind of foundation of what we were trying to look at the core of the film. I think, that's the kind of intellectual core of the film. From a kind of an entertainment perspective, we were drawn to this idea of, again, maybe from our experience as kids running around after hours, like schools get spooky at night, when all the kids go away, you've got this big building and it's empty. And you someone's closed the door, it's 4 hallways away, and you're like, it goes like boom, 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 boom. You hear, you're like, oh my, it becomes like a little horror film. And all the lights get turned off by by the staff and stuff. And so it's like you're one of these dark corridors, the exit signs, the only lights on it. It's very like kind of spooky. So we're like, okay, how do we take these two things we kind of love and or are interested in kind of put them together? And that's where the film kind of came from, I think.
Yeah, and that was going to be one of my next questions, talking about kind of the horror vibe that you set up right at the beginning. There's a lot of establishing shots with those dark corridors, and
Yeah.
I forget if there's really any music over it, but it's definitely a sense of unease that you establish. It sounds like that's what you were going for at the beginning of the film.
Yeah, it was definitely, it's interesting in our previous film, A Lien, we were really interested in this kind of claustrophobia. And I felt like, and Trapped was very much the opposite. We were kind of interested in the absence of space and the absence of stuff. And so you're in this really empty, open space. You're kind of wondering, at all moments, what's behind the next turn in the hallway, what's behind that closed door. And so, really playing into that and playing into, oh, this is a space that we all know because, we've all been in schools, but it's twisted into this space where it's like, well, what does a school look like at night? Who's roaming the hallways at night? And what might we find? Yeah, and I think, you mentioned score, lack of score, the opening of the film, and it's this kind of really wonderful sound design that our sound designer Trevor did together with us, that like we really tried to enhance the noises of the building, that the steam pipes hissing and the lights flickering and the the mechanics going, on top of having this kind of like, muffled radio, like a walkie-talkie going back and forth between the janitors and the head of custodial, who sort of appears later in the film. This kind of idea that there are people working in this large space, but you don't really necessarily know where they are, see them. It's kind of like a unknown agent sort of moving around this kind of large empty space. And that felt kind of cool to us, I think.
Yeah. And obviously we talked a little bit about, the school itself. I'm assuming this was an actual school that you were filming in. A lot of those shots, I don't think you could fake on a short film budget without shooting in an actual school. What was the school? What was it like filming in that setting?
Yeah, the school was in New Jersey, and just a really beautiful school in northern New Jersey. And I think for us, when we're just in general, when we're thinking about a film,
trying to find a location that, that we think really speaks to the story and speaks to the intention feels so integral. And so I think like we took quite a long time to find this specific school to be able to film at because we just thought it spoke to not only being just totally beautiful, but it really kind of spoke to some of the privilege and class components that we were also trying to talk about through the film.
But it's funny that the way the school it ended up being kind of a funny coincidence. So this we were trying to shoot in the school, and we talked to people who were, they were the ones that were like making the decisions. I forget who exactly it was, but things as they were participants signed on to do the project with us, and then like as we got closer and closer to filming, we had these kind of like dates we were shooting at, and the schools harder to get in touch with, and it was a little bit more tricky to try and like like work with them, and we're like wondering what's going on. Anyway, we finally end up showing up on the day, our tiny film crew of like 10 people or 15 people, and the entire school campus was covered in like film trailers. We're like, what's going on? Turns out there's an HBO film shooting in the school at the exact same time we were. And so we ended up like the reason they were a little tricky to work with is they were dealing with like a huge movie actually shooting there. Tons of crew and people running around. And so it's funny, we kind of like became like a little weird like add on to this like larger film shoot that was happening. So we sort of ran around the school like in a low undercover mode a bit.
Yeah, just like your characters are.
Exactly. Yep.
Now, I'm not sure how much you want to give away, but at the center of the film, there is a high school prank that looked like there was a lot of setup involved in this prank
Yeah.
for you guys, I'm sure. How difficult was it to pull off that sequence?
It's funny. I think Dave and I, we if you've seen our other short films, we like complicated things and interesting stuff, and we like these kind of like visual set pieces. And again, people will tell you when you're making a short, oh, you should make like a one-room short, or you should make a short with no actors, or whatever, things that are kind of like easy to achieve. And I think David and I have always been believers that if I don't know, not trying to like, let our imagination be limited by what we think we can get away with. And so, when we kind of hit on this idea of the rat traps as this sort of central prank and sort of metaphor for the movie in some ways, the whole thing kind of just clicked into place. It all kind of made sense. And so we're like, okay, we have to do this. How do we do this? What do we do? How do we figure it out? How do we get a gymnasium full of rat traps? What is that? What do they even look like?
Yeah, I mean, and it just like we always want to sit down and try and be like, what's the hardest problem? And we knew right off the bat, like the hardest problem is going to be, yeah, how do we fill it, a gym with rat traps, and how do we make that fit in our budget? How do we carry in, I mean, when we first did the math, it was like 30,000 rat traps, which is like 3 tons of rat traps. You need like a tractor trailer of rat traps, and we
We're
were
like,
like,
okay,
okay,
that's
well,
not possible.
yeah, that we definitely can't do that. So
Yeah.
we had to do a lot of camera testing and really creative stuff because we knew we wanted to do it all, practically. We wanted
We
to.
talked about VFX. We talked to
Mhm.
VFX people about it. Everyone's like, "Oh, it'd be really hard for all these reasons." We're like, what if we just did this for real, as best we can? And so it kind of began with David was saying this long, almost like R&D process to try and figure out, we could buy a certain number of rat traps. We bought like 1,000 rat traps, which is a lot of rat traps still, but it's not, 30,000 rat traps. So the
Yeah.
question is like, if you only have 1,000 rat traps, what else can be a rat trap on camera that isn't actually a rat trap? And so we ended up spending a lot of time thinking about and testing options, blocks of wood, paper, different types of paper, printouts, folded paper. And we ended up with this really neat solution, which was kind of this paper box, basically like a five-sided box that we got, commercially printed and then die cut, that we folded into 10,000 little paper boxes. And, that the weight of that and the amount of mass, again, it was recyclable, it was much lighter, much cheaper. And so everything that's kind of not directly in the field of view of the camera is sort of these fake rat traps, but they look great. And it was a really interesting solution to a problem that we didn't have any idea how to solve at the beginning.
Gotta love that movie magic and the solutions it comes up with.
Exactly, yeah.
So your film focuses on the janitor, mainly played by Javier Molina. Tell me a little bit about casting him in this role, as well as the young boy who plays his son.
Javi, was amazing to work with, and it was such a pleasure. In the casting process, so we were able to kind of work two ways. So casting Javier, we worked with a fantastic casting director, Matthew Glassner, who is really amazing, and we just we were just looking at all these incredible actors, and then when we saw Javier, he just popped off the screen. It was just so obvious that Javier was right for the role, and we were so grateful that Javier accepted and wanted to be a part of the project, and really I think brings such a grounding performance to the film. And then being able, so many of the other characters, we just looked through thousands and thousands of actors to find many of the other roles, to find, especially the boys, to try and kind of figure out how do we, make that role and how do we make sure that it really comes and feels authentic and not like a caricature of the boys. Felt really important to us.
I think Matt Woodward, who plays kind of the lead boy, I think this was his first film role ever. He was, I think, 18 or 17 when we shot
Yeah.
this.
Yeah.
Just turned 18 maybe. Like he was really was a senior in high school, and he does an amazing job. I think he's at NYU right now, being an awesome acting student. But Cameron, the little kid, was great. And again, when you're trying to find child actors, it's a little complicated because everyone has their limits, and you don't know how they're going to do on set, and it's a bit thing. But I remember David going out to go visit Cameron in person. I think he drove up to his house in Jersey, and I remember getting a call I was working with somebody else, and David was like, "This is the kid. It's definitely him. Like, he's gonna be great." And Cameron was amazing. I think he's gonna be a real star one day. He's totally like so locked in, so smart, really an impressive,
Yeah.
just an amazing kid, but also just a great person to work with. So we had a good time.
Yeah. And I guess finally there's Keith, who, is incredible. And when we saw Keith in Uncut Gems, and we were like, oh,
We got to get this guy.
yeah, how do we get Keith in our film? And he just, just smashed it.
Yeah, kind enough to come on board with us.
That's awesome. I also really like that the janitor he's a father figure. He's just kind of doing his best to look out for his kid, making ends meet. Also saw a very loving father figure in your last film, Lien. Why is it so important to include these types of relationships in your films?
I think in Trapped specifically, we're really interested in this conversation around parenthood, around fatherhood, and around like how do we raise our kids. I think that's one of the questions kind of at the core of the film. Trying to ask some questions about like, yeah, what does it mean to be a parent? And what does it mean to think about how you raise your kids? What are the ways that we're doing it systemically? And so I think that parent role not only humanizes, Javier's character in the film, but also starts to play at that dynamic that we're trying to look at in the film.
Yeah, and I think also like, the idea of like how do we like the society like raise our kids like societally, as times are changing quickly, and I think, the schools like this, like these sort of like super high-end private prep schools, those kids go on to like run the world, and that sort of pipeline is interesting to kind of to look at, and those values that are instilled and taught at these schools are what go on people in the government, what do I want to Princeton or whatever, there's like a direct connection. And so we're trying to figure out basically like and look at like how are these schools structured, and how is the power kind of like laid out, and it's laid out in surprising ways. I think we think, and we think the viewer might think so. And Javier you kind of expect Javier to come in as the adult in the room, be like, okay, this is what's going to happen, and it turns out actually like these boys, these like basically like teenagers have all the power over them, over the staff, over the head of school. Like they've just got this like weird kind of stranglehold on the whole institution. And so yeah, I think it was interesting to look at that, and contrast that with how Javier is raising his kid and all those sort of things to put together.
Yeah, I think both of these films are really poignant in relation to events happening in this country and around the world. How
Yeah.
do you see your work, both of these films as well as your other films, fitting into the broader discussion around things like immigration, racism, classism, a lot of the things we've already talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I think our intention is we think that it's really important to make something that has resonance with the times and with the world that we're in. And I think the films, and many times they come out of Sam and I in discussion with each other, talking about the world and talking about the things that we're seeing and thinking about. And so I think those pieces are really woven throughout our films because we're really interested in the world and in dynamics in the world. And we think that not only having a really fun and strong and emotional story are integral to, a successful film, but we think a film that also says something that leaves you with a question or that leaves you with some things to think about. We love those kinds of films, and I think those are ones that we feel excited and drawn to make.
Yeah, and I think it's our job, and Lien, strangely enough, like essentially came to pass. Like, we predicted the future with that movie, and not because we're some kind of, clairvoyant, whatever, savants, but because I think we're feeling what everyone is feeling, which is like there's these forces out there that are like pushing this dynamic. And I think, Trap has the same thing. I think this sort of like growing, I don't know, cultural fear, zeitgeist, whatever you want to call it, that the wealth gap is just widening like astronomically. That kind of sort of like deep rooted like feeling in the pit of your stomach that, groceries are more expensive tomorrow and then the day after that and the day after that, like all that stuff. And that, going to college is less effective and all these, it all wraps together in this sort of fear. And I think, we're interested in what that looks like in every day for somebody, and how do we take that kind of like zeitgeist and distill it down into a really tight and small story that we can kind of grab onto as a viewer, and maybe put you through it in some way.
Yeah. Well, I have a couple of questions not specifically related to the film, but before I move on to those, is there anything else you want to touch on about Trapped?
No, I don't know. I'm excited for people to see it.
Yeah.
Well, this might be the hardest question I ask, but if you guys had to pick your top 3 films of all time, what would they be?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
I think, okay, well, so Parasite definitely up there for sure. Great movie. That's a film that I think we both love.
I think The Social Network is a film
Definitely.
that we think is really
Definitely.
incredible.
I mean, I think A Serious Man is also a film that we
Yeah.
love. Those
Yes.
three are definitely three films that the two both of us adore, 100%.
And if you could invite any 3 movie characters to your next dinner party, who would they be and why?
I don't throw any dinner parties. That's the thing. We were talking about this beforehand, trying to figure out who that might be. I think, okay, my pet pitch to David was the 3 Marx Brothers. I think that sounds wildly entertaining. Groucho, Harpo, and Chico. Like, I mean, what more do you want at a dinner party than those three goons?
Right.
Sure.
Or Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli go.
That's true.
Really
Also a
the
trio.
trio.
For the Asian.
It would be an amusing dinner. You'd have to put your battle axes at the front door.
I would kind of like to see the Marx Brothers with those other 3 and
Here we
see what would
go.
happen.
Exactly. 100%. Yep.
And do you guys have any books you could recommend that you've either read recently or really enjoy? Can be fiction or nonfiction and don't have to relate to movies.
So I've been on a big Agatha Christie kick, which I love mysteries. And I just finished And Then There Were None, the ultimate Agatha Christie book, which I think excellent. Definitely recommend anybody who likes a good mystery. I think our mom is a literature teacher, and I think she kind of grew up instilled in us like Agatha Christie's like trash, like it's cheap stuff. But I don't know. I found it to be very compelling, and the prose and the sort of like the basic writing behind it too is also quite fun in that world recently. I don't know. What are you reading, Dave?
Yeah, no, every time I'm like, okay, Sam, like, let's work. Sam's like, wait, hold on. I have just a little bit more. I gotta listen to just a little bit more. We're about to figure something out. So yeah, it's delightful.
I don't know. I also read the Red Rising series recently, the trilogy. My friend recommended that to me. It's like a kind of epic sci-fi trilogy. I thought that was great. What else have I read? I read The Will of the Many recently. That's kind of more of like a fantasy. James Islington, I think, wrote that. I don't know. What do you read some Amor Towles recently, I think, right, Dave?
Yep.
Rules of Civility. Do you like that?
Yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, anyway, I don't know. That's what we're
Awesome. Some good recommendations for folks who've never read some of those. And who else from the world of film should I have on the podcast as a future guest?
Gosh, well, there are a lot of people we don't know. I mean, I don't know. And I'd love to hear like Spielberg, you know what I mean? But like people, in terms of people that we know personally, is that the idea?
Either one. It can be any, somebody super famous, or it can be someone who's you've worked with or that you just really enjoy their work and you want to boost them up a little bit. Either one.
Well, I mean, we have some people in our lives, I think, who are worthy to talk to, but people I'd want to hear an interview with. I think I really would love. I want to hear more of Tony Gilroy talk. Like
Yeah,
he's a guy who I think
absolutely.
both of us deeply respect, and not just for Andor, but for like Michael Clayton and a lot of his earlier movies, and someone who doesn't do interviews that much. And I think getting in the weeds with him about writing and the writing process would be something I think both of us would absolutely love to hear more of. Not that you can talk to Tony Gilroy, but if you get an opportunity.
We'll certainly try.
I'm trying to think of folks that are like maybe less well known than Tony Gilroy.
Okay, the fact.
As much
Well,
as you know.
I was gonna say the other two is so our two producers on Trapped, our friends Alex Morse-Nudo and Tara Sheffer are both
Yeah.
in similar situations to us in certain ways, and they're both working on first features in different directions, and they're having different types of experiences, and super be super interesting for filmmakers who are trying to make their first feature to kind of hear from both of them together, whatever, talking
Yeah.
about what it's like to go through the first feature process and really kind of like understand that. I think they're meeting challenges and overcoming them in ways that are really interesting, and I have a deep appreciation for their hard work. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
they're both incredibly talented and incredibly hardworking,
yeah,
and really have, I think, some really interesting insights to share.
yeah.
Super. Well, we'll see if we can get them on. And lastly, before we wrap up, do you guys have any other projects that you're working on? And also, where can people follow you on social media to keep tabs on your journey?
Yeah, we're hard at work on our debut feature. So if you liked our stuff, you're gonna really love the feature. It's super fun and intense and exciting. So we can't wait to share that. So keep on a lookout for that upcoming.
Yeah, in terms of finding us, I think, well, so if you want to see Trapped, it hopefully will be out publicly soon. We're still trying to figure out where the release is going to be, but if you're an Academy member, you can see it in the Academy screening room. But all the other live action shorts that are not longlisted for the Oscars this year. And then social media wise, it's just at Sam Cutler-Kreutz, at David Cutler-Kreutz on Instagram, at Cutler-Kreutz.com. If you want to find our work there, we have all of our work as well. So,
Well, thank you both so much for the time today. Really appreciated you sharing your film and getting to hear some of what went into making this one, as well as Lee.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us on.
thanks so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you again to my guests today, Sam and David Cutler-Kreutz. Their film Trapped won the grand prize at this year's Holly Shorts Film Festival and is currently qualified for the Best Live Action Short at the 98th Academy Awards. The Oscar Project podcast is written and produced by me, Jonathan Eacherberg, with editing assistance from Joshua Eacherberg. If you want more movie coverage, check out the Oscar Project online at theoscarproject.substack.com. I'll be back on Friday to discuss the 1929 film Their Own Desire, and next Tuesday I'll have an interview with Student Academy Award winner Tobias Eckerlin. Until then, I hope to see you at the movies.